Under the burning Arizona sun of 1860, the land was dry, wild, and cruel, a place where only the strong survived. James, a young cowboy no older than 20, was used to the silence of canyons and the restless company of his horse. But that afternoon, something shattered the calm, a cry sharp and desperate bouncing off the canyon walls. He pulled his reins hard, his heart hammering in his chest. Instinct told him it was no coyote's wail or bird's cry. This was human. His hand reached for the revolver at his side as he spurred his horse forward, racing toward the sound, with a mix of fear and duty coursing through his blood. When James reached the bend of the canyon, his eyes froze on the scene before him. Two young Apache girls, one barely 10, the other perhaps 12, stood trapped against a wall of jagged stone. A group of raiders, their rifles slung casually as though it was sport, closed in with grins sharp as knives. The older girl clutched her sister's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened, but neither moved, paralyzed with terror. James felt rage rise in him like a fire. He didn't think, he acted. Kicking his horse forward, he drew his revolver and fired a shot into the sky. The thunderous crack echoed, startling both the outlaws and the frightened children. The raiders spun, startled by the sight of a lone cowboy charging at full speed, dust exploding beneath pounding hooves. The men weren't cowards, but they knew the risk. A cowboy's courage was dangerous, unpredictable, and sometimes fatal to those who underestimated it. They hesitated, exchanging glances, then melted into the shadows of the canyon, muttering curses as they retreated. James pulled his horse to a stop in front of the girls, chest heaving, gun still warm in his hand. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the frightened breaths of the children. He slid from the saddle, crouched low, and spoke softly so as not to scare them further. "It's all right now," he said, though his own heart still raced. The younger girl clung to her sister, tears streaking through the dust on her face. The older one, though trembling, lifted her chin with defiance, her dark eyes fixed on James with both suspicion and desperate hope. He admired her courage even as he saw the fear beneath it. Slowly, James reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a blanket. With careful hands, he draped it around their small shoulders, tucking it gently as though it were armor. "No one will harm you while I draw breath," he promised, his voice carrying the weight of something far greater than words. That night, James built a small fire beneath the endless desert sky. The flames flickered, shadows dancing on the canyon walls as the sisters huddled close together, wrapped in his blanket. They had not spoken a word, but their silence was not empty. It was the silence of trust slowly forming. James sat nearby, his revolver within reach, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of return. He knew the desert could be cruel, but what struck him most was the thought of how close the girls had come to vanishing, their young lives extinguished in a world where mercy was scarce. As the stars glittered overhead, James swore to himself that saving them was no accident. Fate had placed him there, and from that night forward he would bear the weight of their safety. The bond of protection was not just spoken, it was etched into the dust, sealed by firelight, and witnessed by the endless desert sky. 15 years had passed since that night in the Arizona Canyon, and James Harper was no longer the restless, sharp-eyed cowboy who had fired warning shots into the air to save two frightened girls. The years had etched themselves into his face, carving lines of sun and wind across his skin. His hair had begun to gray at the edges. His shoulders carried the weight of ranch work and solitude, and his voice had taken on the slow, steady rhythm of a man who lived mostly with cattle, fences, and silence. His ranch stretched wide beneath the hot sun, a lonely kingdom of dust and grass where each dawn felt the same as the last. Still, every once in a while, when the fire crackled at night or the wind whispered through the canyons, James thought back to that evening long ago, the cries, the fear in those young eyes, and the promise he had made. Life on the frontier demanded everything from a man, and James had given nearly all. He mended his fences alone, drove his herds across long miles, and slept under the same stars that had once watched over him and those sisters. Sometimes he wondered what had become of them. Did they remember him at all? Had they returned to their people safe among family? Their lives unfolding in ways far removed from the ragged cowboy who had appeared at the right place and time. Perhaps they had forgotten him. He would not blame them. He had been a passing figure in their story, a fleeting guardian in the face of danger. But deep down, he hoped that somewhere in their hearts, they remembered the stranger who had sworn to protect them. One summer evening, the sun burned low on the horizon, turning the sky a deep amber that bathed the land in gold. James leaned against the gate of his corral, wiping sweat from his brow after a long day of work. The stillness of the evening was broken by the distant sound of hooves. He straightened, squinting against the setting sun. Two riders approached from the dust, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of the horizon. He watched carefully, hand resting on the rail, every sense sharpened. Out here, unexpected visitors could mean danger, or something else entirely. As the riders drew near, his breath caught in his throat. They were women, dressed in riding skirts and moccasins, their posture confident, their movements graceful as the horses slowed to a stop before his gate. For a moment, James could not speak. The faces before him stirred something deep in his memory. Familiar eyes, dark and steady, though older now, sharper with time and life's trials. He knew them instantly. The girls he had once wrapped in his blanket, who had clung to each other in terror as children, now stood before him as women. The younger dismounted first, her movements quick but elegant. She smiled through tears that glistened in the evening light. "You never left our hearts," she whispered, her voice carrying the echo of a child who had once looked at him with fear and hope in equal measure. Her sister joined her, her hand resting briefly on James's arm, steady and sure. "We have carried you with us every day since," she said softly. "You saved us once, but you gave us more than life. You gave us the belief that goodness still lived in this land." James's chest tightened, and for the first time in many years words seemed to fail him. He removed his weathered hat, bowing his head as though to steady himself against the rush of emotions. "I only did what was right," he managed, though his voice trembled with the weight of all those years. "I thought of you often. I prayed you had found peace." The sisters exchanged a glance, then turned back to him with eyes full of certainty. "We found our people again," the elder said. "But our lives were never the same. We always knew we would come back to thank you, to honor you, and to stand with you." The bond forged in firelight, and fear had not faded with time. It had grown stronger, stretched across years and distance, until it had finally drawn them back to him. That night, the ranch that had long known only silence came alive with voices and laughter. James built a fire in the yard, just as he had all those years ago, and the sisters sat with him, telling him stories of their lives, of battles faced and victories won, of how they had always spoken of the cowboy who had once placed himself between them and death. The flames danced against their faces, and James felt something bloom in his chest, something he had long thought buried. Loneliness had been his constant companion, but now, in the laughter of these women, in their tears and their warmth, he felt the weight of solitude lift. Days turned into weeks, and the bond deepened. The sisters worked alongside him on the ranch, their strength and determination a match for his own. They cooked meals, tended to the animals, and brought a sense of home James had never known before. What had begun as a single act of courage 15 years earlier had transformed into something larger than any of them could have imagined, a family. James realized then that fate had not played a trick on him that day in the canyon. It had planted a seed, one that had taken years to grow, but had finally blossomed in the most unlikely way. He had saved 2 frightened girls, but in return they had saved him from a life of emptiness. And as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky with fire, James knew that his story was no longer one of solitude, but of love, loyalty, and family. Forever bound, not by blood, but by the unbreakable thread of fate on the frontier.